Seth, has anyone ever told you that you look like Jared Leto?
Oh my God, you're just saying that because I want to bone him so bad.
But seriously, though, anybody back me up here? I mean, when you're a little more clean cut with your short hair and stuff, you absolutely resemble him.
You have a Leto-esque appearance. Leto-like?
I can absolutely see it.
Didn't do the best Joker, I'm sorry. I was a little bit of tacked on that Blade Runner sequel.
Isn't it interesting how back in the day he was this fresh-faced guy that was in movies like American Psycho and Requiem for a Dream and Fight Club.
Blonde in Fight Club?
And Panic Room, which, by the way, shout out to Panic Room because that movie rocks. But he's also got these like dreads in it. He's a ridiculous character in it, but I don't know, maybe that's what got into his head as far as being an actor because, you know, before these days where he's just like the big method actor for bad movies, he's like the shitty Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, I like him in Requiem for a Dream, and I can't think of another movie where I really like him.
Oh, watch Panic Room, man.
Okay.
That movie's awesome, and he's funny.
I honestly didn't know much about Jared Leto at all as an actor or a human until all my research for this episode, and I did a Google search on Jared Leto, and boy, did that take me places.
Oh yeah, he's in the band. He's in 30 Seconds to Mars.
He like leads a sex cult.
Oh, does he have a sex cult?
Oh, that's like what the tabloids are saying.
That's so cool. Only the sex cult guy would make Morbius.
Oh man, in Morbius, this story was going around that I guess this character has a limp or has to walk on crutches or something. And so, of course, he insisted spending the entire production limping around. And whenever he would have to go to the bathroom, it would take him so long to get there and back that it was like halting production, seriously. And so he came to an agreement with the director where he agreed to let someone push him in a wheelchair to and from the bathroom every time he had to go.
And that's why it didn't land with audiences.
And the movie made $50 at the box office. So good job. Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the film podcast where we confront the good, the bad, and in most cases, the ugly of what cinema has to offer. I am Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we're discussing two very different films from writer-director Darren Aronofsky, spanning opposite ends of his career. Those movies are 2000's grueling drug cautionary tale Requiem for a Dream and 2017's audience-alienating psychodrama Mother.
Did you say we're disgusting or we're discussing?
Did I really say that?
You said today we're disgusting. Yeah.
I think we are disgusting.
I didn't like that one anyways. Let's go back.
No, I liked it. Let's keep going. Don't leave me here. It's a This intros can be a conversation, you know?
This is disgusting, what is happening right now.
I think this is going fine.
Yeah, let's get this show on the road.
All right, well, I would like to start by introducing our very special guest today. This is our good friend James Jackson, who is coming to us from Pittsburgh. He is a writer and works in the film industry, currently has a rather high-profile production he's involved in right now, which we are not going to name. But James, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Marc and Seth. Love this podcast.
Can I call you JJ?
You can call me anything you want.
Whoa.
Your rules.
JJ. So this
right.
mysterious film you're working on, it is Requiem for a Dream 2, right?
Yes.
Electric
Yes.
Boogaloo.
Relax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're the first person we've had on the show that is this close to the industry. So we'll see what kind of perspective that brings. But I also know that you're pretty familiar with Darren Aronofsky and are, or at least were, a pretty big fan of his. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I used to be like the biggest Darren Aronofsky stan on the planet in such an obnoxious way. I just viewed all his films as like gospel, like all through like college and in my early 20s. And then he made Noah, and I think my opinion started changing.
That was the
No
turning point
offense.
for you?
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
no offense. No offense. That's
yeah.
so funny. No offense.
But yeah, and then I just like upon a lot of rewatches, I've found that I've just not been as nearly as affected as the first time, which is always like a very visceral experience. Like for each of his movies, they just come at you really hard, and then try to make you feel destroyed in some way.
Oh yeah.
But the effect has been lost on subsequent rewatches.
Of like all his movies for
Um,
you, or are there ones that like still stick to it for you?
oh yeah, and I mean I still enjoy like I had like I had like a very like gross image of Mother in my mind uh, before rewatching this, and I still kind of do. But watching it a few days ago, again for the first time in like 5 years, I was just like, it was hilarious, and then just like very just challenging, I guess, at the end.
I'll tell you
Um,
what, I had never seen that movie before,
mm,
and that's a silly movie.
yeah,
That's a crazy movie. Just totally
yeah,
off the chain, running down the street.
hmm
Wow,
yeah.
wow.
The Fountain was my favorite movie for a very long time, but it might still be. I just haven't watched it in a few years, and then my opinion on Darren is soured.
See, we were just talking about that one. That one seems to be. I've heard it both ways. Where like Mark kind of hates that one, and
Hmm
I've heard people say that like maybe it's his best, but other people say it's his worst. I love that. I love that kind of stuff. I'm always into that stuff, so it makes me want to see it again. I haven't seen it
It's
since high
definitely
school.
one of his most.
His most.
I'll say that much.
It's his
Best or
max.
worst, it's a lot. But a lot of these movies are a lot, and I think maybe that's the thing that unites Aronofsky's pretty wide-ranging career is that there's a lot going on, and some of the movies are more minimal than others, but they're usually pretty ambitious and sometimes can barely stand up on their own. They're so jam-packed full of things. And I
Yeah.
definitely see how he's kind of an ideal filmmaker for younger people who are first getting into, really exciting stylistic films. And
Oh,
that's
for
going
sure.
back to Requiem for a Dream, which we're going to start with. Because as much of a downer as that movie is, and we'll get plenty in depth about that, it's really feels like the work of a hungry young filmmaker who wants to throw in absolutely every visual and audio idea that he can come up with. And in the span between Requiem for a Dream and Mother, which we chose basically because they're kind of on opposite ends of his career, and there's a lot of weird stuff in between them, but I think that they're probably both closest to unwatchable territory, and I think maybe they would make the biggest impression on somebody, for better or for worse. The
Yeah, I
only
hadn't seen
Mhm.
Requiem in a long like I hadn't seen it in a long time. Um, before like a couple years ago, I finally rewatched it, and I think I was like kind of poo pooing it at that point because like you see stuff in your early film watching life that's like is transformative and exciting like Aronofsky is, and then you get a little like you see a little more and you cross your arms about like some of your early like big movies that you saw. But and for a second I was kind of questioning why this would be on the Unwatchables podcast, but like boy, like it goes there. There's some real darkness. There really is some real darkness. Like the word
Yeah, he's a
intense gets thrown around like with his movies a lot, but there's like a very true to life. I think that's maybe what the biggest strength of this movie is, that a lot of it is just like as much as like in comparison to Mother and his more like far out crazy like later career stuff. This is rooted in like the real dark reality that we can all very easily slip into if given certain circumstances.
yeah, he's a guy who likes to just take like this character with a weird obsession and then just drive them to the craziest extremes. And even in like Requiem for a Dream, these characters are more normal than the kinds you see later in his career. Like there's like the ballerina that's obsessed with perfection, and just like Jennifer Lawrence is like a pseudo human thing.
True.
But
Oh yeah, even looking at something like
there's...
Noah, you can see that going, running through that he's this obsessed, driven guy on the brink of madness. And yeah, I mean, that definitely applies to the Fountain. Even applies to the Wrestler, which is kind of the one that's, I don't know if that's the outlier in his filmography or not. It seems like it's definitely the most minimal, like lowest key one, stylistically and story-wise. But before we get too much into his other work, at the time Requiem came out, he had only done one movie, which was Pi. And I actually watched this for the very first time just a couple days ago, and quite liked it. It's, very low budget and it's shot in a very stark, high contrast, washed out black and white. And all the seeds are there, I think, for his whole career. It's kind of this descent into paranoia that gets more hallucinatory as it goes.
It's got that fake Aphex Twin break beats through the whole thing that really date it in this fun way that Requiem also has, which I kind of love that. In hindsight, I kind of love how both that movie and Requiem for a Dream are kind of dated in this fun way. They're very a part of that time period, it feels like.
Yeah, they're very similar with their scores, with their sound design, and especially this device of having a bunch of really repetitive, rapid cutting close-ups, so that every time someone's opening or closing a door, or in the case of Requiem for a Dream, shooting up, you get these same close-ups of like a dilated eye and a little cell splitting. And
I think
it's
he calls
same
them
sound
hip-hop.
cue.
Yeah, I think he calls them hip-hop montages.
Oh,
where it's just rapid cuts
Yeah.
with accompanied by just like extreme sounds, so that it like makes like a rhythm.
Whoosh, whooshcore.
Yeah.
Whoosh.
So there's a lot of similarities. The guy in Pi is like a mathematician losing his mind, trying to come up with a number that somehow solves something about the universe and
again
stock market.
An obsessive male
Yep.
guy trying to do something at the center of the movie that destroys everything.
Yeah, and it's the kind of movie that would come out, through the festivals and be like, oh, who is this guy? It makes a big impression. It's almost like a demo reel or something of like everything that he can do stylistically. And I feel like Requiem for a Dream, then as the follow-up, is a realization of those things on a bigger scale. So it's more polished and there's better actors and performances in it. And I'm not sure that it's a better movie, but I do think that it makes a big impression that way, in a way that, I mean, even his movies since then, I don't think have gone quite into the overdrive like the entire way through the way that Requiem does. But just for a little bit of background, this was based on a 1978 novel by Hubert Selby Jr., which I have not read, but I know that he did write the script with the novelist, and the novelist actually appears in the movie. He's the guy at the end yelling at Marlon Wayans while he's
the problem with
working in prison.
Is,
Yep.
I've always wanted to read him.
I did read the book 10 years ago, and I loved it. But I don't know if it was because I was such a huge Darren Aronofsky fan. But I'm also currently reading another Hubert Selby book, just independently of this right now, called The Demon, which is very misogynistic, but very good.
I've read part of that. I could not get through it because it was so horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one where it's just like a guy in a prison cell talking. Like the entire book is just him monologuing. Oh,
unless yeah. If maybe that's a twist somewhere, but yeah. No, this is just about this. I don't know, some satyr has possessed this dude, and he just has to hook up with a bunch of people.
A satyr with like horns?
Apparently, that's what the back says. I haven't gotten to that, but it seems like this novelist is also a dark guy. The Requiem for a Dream book was, I remember it being like very like the movie and the book were pretty similar, but there was a lot more of the mother, and so it was like basically just like from two perspectives, if I remember properly. It's been several years.
And that one's from like
And
the 50s or something, right?
The Requiem for a
70s or
Dream or
80s.
the other one?
Okay. So there's clearly some like updating going on with the movie itself, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But it being
Yeah.
this like tale as old as time, right?
Yeah, and I'd be curious to see exactly what the book is like or how it's written, because I do feel like the plot is pretty bare bones as far as this movie goes, and the real interest in it is how he juices everything up stylistically, like every moment. But the reason that we have this movie on this particular podcast is that a lot of people view this as a very punishing, depressing, intense movie, which I think it definitely is. And I know that when it first came out, it was slapped with an NC-17 rating, which back in 2000 was a much bigger deal than it would be now, because the theaters wouldn't play it. And I remember that after the studio decided that they were just going to release it unrated, if you were to go to like Blockbuster or a major video chain to try and rent it, you had to get this R-rated version that cut stuff out. I think mainly from the kind of sex scene, if you want to call it that, towards the end. I think that was really the only thing.
I mean, that is the thing, that ending montage that it all builds towards. But I guess we should talk about what the bare bones plot is, which is great because it is this archetypal fall from grace sort of story. It's just mainly centered around Jared Leto, enter the Letoverse, Jennifer Connelly. I forget their names. I'm always bad with people's names when they're celebrities in movies. I just never think of them like
right.
Mary. That's Marianne. No, that's Jennifer.
Marion and Harry is Jared Leto's character, and
Marion.
And his mother is Sarah Goldfarb, played by Ellen Burstyn. And then we have Marlon Wayans as their friend Tyrone. And as far as I know, this is Marlon Wayans' pretty much only dramatic film role. He's known for the Scary Movie films and White Chicks and Little Man and all kinds of awful comedies. And
he's good
it
in
seemed
this.
like this didn't. Yeah, he's very good in this, but it didn't seem
great.
to lead anywhere. Interestingly enough.
The only bit of trivia that I have for this movie is that he said that he used all the money that he got from this movie to buy everybody at the wrap party lobster. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but
so he must have had a huge paycheck from this.
That's all my trivia. But yeah, it is just pretty basic. It reminds me a lot of the movie Trainspotting, which is came out earlier than this, but it's also this sort of like, the trajectory is that the first part of the movie, I mean, it still is a rocky road, but it is showing you, I think rightfully so, the fun part of being like into drugs and being frivolous and being free. It's just Jennifer Connelly and Jared Leto being in love. They're just kids in love in New York, and it's just like all filmed like it's a dream or something. I love the first half of this movie. I think it's just so exciting. And they're just like doing drugs and running from the cops and just doing whatever they want to do. And it's just that feeling of being in the prime of your youth before, shit gets real, which is the second half of the movie, right?
Yeah, and Marlon Wayans is just kind of their friend, the third wheel, who's always hanging around with them. And basically, they're addicted to I guess it's suggested it's heroin, and they get into dealing it, basically. That's where the shift happens for them. And it's just like any other pretty typical kind of drug rise and fall story where, business goes good for a while and they're like, oh, we just got to get one more big score. They can't get the big score. They start to get too high off their own supply, and things downward spiral from there. Well, at the same time, we have this parallel storyline going on with Harry's mother, who's the Ellen Burstyn character. And that's a little more of an interesting thread to me than the rest of the parts of this movie. I would say that the heart of this movie is the mother character, where basically she's alone. She's alone and widowed, and her son is always breaking in to steal her TV and sell it, and she's got to go out and buy it back. And she thinks that she's going to end up on a game show because she gets a phone call and some paperwork to fill out, and wants to lose weight to fit into her old red dress, which leads to her getting prescribed diet pills and basically going into like a speed psychosis. And just like everyone else in the movie, it's just a slow motion downward spiral to her misery and despair as well. And I think story wise, that's pretty much all Requiem for a Dream is. Unless, am I missing anything?
They say ass to ass at one point.
They do. That would be the scene that got it an NC-17 rating.
Yes, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for
also,
sure.
Jared Leto. Should we talk about how Jared Leto is really bonable in this movie? He's just so hot. And Jennifer. I would just like, I'd do crimes. I would do crimes just to be in the same room with them, doing ecstasy and being hot.
Seth would be buying from them for sure.
I would. Get.
He'd be like the guy they couldn't get.
Can I just stand by you guys?
Like, hey, Seth wants to come buy some. To come score from us. Like, oh man, but he's not going to leave for like a few hours. He always sits on the couch and keeps asking us questions.
I'll come over, I'll shoot up some weed, and I'll just look at how pretty you guys are.
I keep editing notes for myself while we're recording, so I'm just adding here, Seth too horny at 36 minutes.
Oh, thank you.
Someone get the hose.
It takes longer.
But yeah, those two actors are, I mean, at their youngest and most beautiful and fresh-faced in this film.
Oh yeah.
Although Jennifer Connelly was in Labyrinth, and she was way but that was not they didn't have the same career path where Jared Leto is not a child actor. I think Jennifer Connelly is like one of the rare child actors who like got success.
She survived Dario Argento.
Mm-hmm.
Phenomenon. That movie's fucking crazy, and it's like it could be a very good double feature with Labyrinth, I think. But and here she is. I think she does a great job in this movie. I think and I talk about them being hot or something, sure, but also they are perfect. You can tell for Darren Aronofsky to like run around with these people, because he is just like, he's so visual. He's like, which is always a redundant thing to say about a filmmaker, but like you said, the whole thing about this movie is that the bare bones plot, pretty boring, pretty straightforward, but like what it is, it's like, it's about experiencing this movie. It's about seeing it, and they are a big part of it. And you get caught up in their energy, I think.
Absolutely. I think that the statistic is like in a typical like 100-minute movie, there's usually like between 600, 700 cuts just throughout like the whole film. And this one has over 2,000. So editing, I think, is really paramount here. Because of course we get those like repetitive, quick close-ups when they're getting high and other things are happening, but there's so much more than that too. The way that he uses like time-lapse photography in this and slow motion, sometimes in the same shot, where it's like you'll have one character who seems to be moving in slow motion while everyone around her is going super fast, and these in these long tracking shots, and lots of split screen too, which I think is a little underused these days.
It's like a comic book or something.
Yeah, just from the opening sequence with stealing the television, like that's like, it's so heartbreaking, and like so like then you're just like, oh shit, this is the ride I'm in for. Just like this mother-son relationship that doesn't really, I mean, you can tell they love each other, like eventually, like not particularly in that scene, unless I'm forgetting some details, but That's
Yeah.
just like it just doesn't get any better from there. That's like the baseline of what happens. Like
If
that's like
I don't
one of
want
the
to put you
best things that
on the
happens to
spot,
them.
James.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to put you on the spot, James, but I feel like we rarely talk about like technical stuff on this podcast because it's so like usually more thesis based. But like since you seem to have a little bit of a background in film, I don't know if you like have any insight on some of the like filmmaking conventions that are going on because they are like incredibly intense. Like a lot of these, like, isn't there like a rig or something at some point where it's like attached to the person's
This,
face, like a
yeah,
camera?
the steady cam, yeah, where it just straps to the person's body, and then usually a steady cam operator will be the person, the actual camera operator, like following the person, which is something that Darren does a lot in his career, where he just like, especially in like The Wrestler and stuff, where he's following Mickey Rourke around with the steady cam. But in this, it's different because Steadicam is facing, like, Jennifer Connelly is the Steadicam operator because it's strapped to her and she's walking around with it, which you don't really see that much as far, or at least as often. Like I can't really think of too many instances where the the actor is has the Steadicam like facing themselves in
And
that
it, yeah,
way.
it achieves
It's
this effect where like so that the actor is fixed in the center of the frame and only the
mm,
background seems to be moving. And when they're like running, like when Marlon Wayans is tearing ass down the street and it's strapped to him, it's a really
It's
strange
so cool.
effect. Yeah, where
mm-hmm.
it seems like just the background is going nuts.
And I know there's definitely like certain things they must have had to use to get these crazy close-ups. I don't know what kind of shit went into that, but I know just like from what little I've used with cameras is like trying to actually get something that small, that close, and that in focus, like it's wild. Like someone's
It must have just been
pupil.
like, yeah, must have been like someone's like just microscope lens or something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like or micro photography, whatever scientists use.
Which is
Yeah.
interesting
But
to see in a movie like this that is so like even at its like most extreme is like an extreme every day. It's like an aspect of every day that we like kind of see, but is now we're using like crazy technology to document it, which is I think is the most interesting part of the movie. Um, Something like a
Yeah.
microscopic lens to document just like someone who's life is being destroyed and about to live on the streets or something. It's really
It's lots of
disorienting.
switching between the super, close-ups and wide shots, which has a very kind of startling effect going back and forth, especially in these like surreal fantasy sequences. Because again, there's so many
Yeah,
tricks going on in here, but a lot of the stuff in particular with Ellen Burstyn's character when she is just losing her mind on speed, those scenes go so over the top where she's trying not to eat and we literally have like cupcakes and donuts swirling in the sky like around her.
yeah. Which feel as much as they are like very
Yeah.
much in the film world, I could see where I would like to read the book in that way that it feels how it might be to read a book sometimes, where you are sort of seeing this like a few commas, a string of sentences can sometimes equate into this sort of amorphous, like more lyrical, poetic kind of image in your head, which it seems like Darren is going for more of that rather than a naturalistic kind of way of doing things.
yeah, they are
Sure.
like just like how the music has dated the movie. Those effects have like sort of.
That's
I feel
true.
like they've both made it like they've both outdated it and like made it kind of timeless in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's that whole scene where the what's his face, Shooter McGavin. Shooter McGavin is in this movie
Mm.
from Happy Gilmore, and he comes out of the TV at one point as like a strange staticky TV man, and he's talking to her and stuff. I love that scene.
Yeah, we didn't even mention these infomercials that the Kirk character is constantly watching, and we see them all throughout the movie. We start and end with them, and eventually he's kind of like a self-help guru guy about losing weight and not eating sugar and giving these seminars. And yeah, eventually they come right out of the TV. We got people working on the set walking into her living room and moving stuff around, and they do a conga line. Like, it's a pure nightmare. And I like when it's not afraid to get even kind of silly like that, because
Mm-hmm.
so much of this is dour, and even though it's still not a fun time, it's still something horrible and intense happening, but it seems a little more playful and out there, which in general is what I've found that I like about his movies with the ones that I like. So
Yeah.
this kind of just dips its toe into that, going like really over the top in that way. But I think it's welcome here. And all of his whole kitchen sink approach to, the formal elements to this, I don't mind here. Some people think it's a little too much, or it's a little too showy, or that it's style over substance. And even though I do think this is a little lacking on the substance front, that's just all the more reason for me to enjoy this mostly as, an aesthetic object. Um, and so I don't know. I don't necessarily think that all that stuff is too much, because without it, I mean, this would be such a just painful, miserable slog, right?
It'd be super boring. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even like the way he shoots the film, it's just like he tries to keep you as stimulated as possible. Like just like the drugs that the the one set of main characters is taking, or just like the speed that Ellen Burstyn's character is taking.
Mm.
He's just like constantly trying to stimulate you in as many different ways as possible, and that even goes
Momentum.
down to like, yeah, it even goes down to like the camera lenses, and or the types of lenses where they're just, you have like a TV screen that you're viewing. Sometimes you have surveillance cameras at some point. You have just extreme close-ups. Can't think of like other examples, but I was just thinking of like the surveillance camera, the game show
Mm-hmm.
itself, and then the various
Yeah.
types of and of course the still photography, which is underutilized in a lot of films, but there's just not a whole lot of reason to use it in many movies. But the photography is like beautiful, and that keeps you like, it keeps me entertained when I'm watching the movie, just seeing these
And and I think that's a
clips.
good. It's good to harp on it, and it's. I don't think it is necessarily um, style over substance. Like the style is there, and it's not. It's not just there to appease your ADHD or something. I think it is there to put you in the mindset of these characters that are like hurtling like towards like a horrible end, which happens to people in real life. And like when you make mistakes, you probably aren't seeing like what's ahead of you, like which is that horrible ending montage at the end of the movie, right? You are seeing all the exciting stuff, and things are moving too fast, at like almost to the point of distraction, almost to the point of being style over substance, to the point where like these characters are in too deep suddenly before they could even realize it, and they're suddenly trapped. Like you don't even. It's hard to pinpoint where the point of no return necessarily is in this movie, for that reason, and I like that about it.
I find it interesting that even the supposed, good times early on don't necessarily play that way to me. Like, there's definitely some
Mm-hmm.
stuff between, the lovers that is affecting, or, that they definitely care for each other. But there's right from the beginning, and I think all throughout, the doom is just overbearing. So
Yeah,
even
he's
when
still
they're
stealing his grandma's TV or whatever,
right,
like.
or like that scene where him and Marlon Wayans are sitting at some sort of a food stand or something, and steal this cop's gun and throw it back and forth to each other. And then it turns out that it was a fantasy or something. But even
Oh.
there, they seem to be tapping into the jittery, paranoid aspect of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's weird because all this stuff that we're talking about, all of the surface style stuff. I mean, it almost strikes me like a music video sensibility. Um, that every moment has its own tone and its own new kind of rhythm to it.
Yeah, James
Uh,
said hip hop montage, right? Was
exactly.
that the term? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which on one hand, that's what's so engaging about it, but it's also, I know it feels to me at times like it's its own highlight reel. Like it's constantly going for the big moments and everything. And I guess the times where it does calm down and get more still, that does really stand out because of how frenetic everything else is. But I wonder if maybe that's where I'm coming from with the characterization and everything, where we have these really good performances and there's plenty of really real and true feeling moments in it. It's just the trajectory of the characters seems so predetermined to me, but with the doom starting out from the very beginning and the way that this is so committed just to viscerally capturing the downward spiral. Like, I feel like this is a movie that really has like a one track mind, and
Yes.
it is possible to find it a little tiring or reductive as it goes on. So by the time we
Borderline
even get to that
preachy,
last
almost.
scene, exactly, it's almost, I feel like underneath all of this stuff, this is maybe just like the best looking after school special ever made.
That's exactly what I like came to mind like the last couple times I saw this movie, which is like I wonder about it. I'm never quite sure by the end because it is I don't know that it's trying to say anything like that hasn't been said before. It's still very deep and very important. Like it's important to showcase um, this sort of downward spiral that happens all around us. Like every time you walk down the street, like you can, or you can feel it yourself that, maybe you're in a safe place in this time in your life or something because of various factors, but you can very easily like see that maybe the line isn't so far away from you being the person on the street who's quote unquote saying crazy stuff, like who has been through stuff, and been through something like this movie maybe. But it does sometimes feel like, is the point of this movie to tell me that like drugs are bad? Like, but yeah, I don't know. I What do you think about that, James?
I mean, along those lines, I do feel like the movie does it kind of goes too fast in that direction. Like I would like to see like more like backstory and more character development and maybe less of like the extreme stuff that like happens at the end. Or you can still do the extreme stuff maybe, but maybe just like draw things out a little bit more. Because I feel like once things start descending, they just like it just goes down the rabbit hole. And
Yeah.
I just it would just be nice to see like some of my favorite parts of this movie is just like when like Harry is talking to his mother like the first time that he sees her just like on drugs, and that's like a I don't know, it's like a 5 minute scene and just like they're having like a real conversation, and then he just discovers like something is off with her. Like it would be nice if there were like more moments like that with like more developed like character interactions, because it moves so fast sometimes you just can't like get the sense of who these characters actually mean to each other. um,
Yeah, you start to wonder if they are just there to be archetypes or something, because they
mhm.
sometimes feel like that. Like even Jennifer Connelly is like, oh, she's the rich girl who, thinks she's totally untouchable, and then all of a sudden she's in this horrible situation, and there's all these, all the characters are kind of like that. Uh, you almost wonder if that's by design in order to make them sort of just like more machinery for the bombast of the whole thing. Because I don't know if that's necessarily a fault of the movie, because it's still, I mean, even if that is a fault, it still does kind of help to make it so much more straightforward and so much more intense. I just think, yeah, it could have been more of like a multi-level experience if I could have
Yeah, I mean,
actually
like
like
Jennifer.
felt like Jared was a real person, like a
Mhm.
singular kind of character.
Yeah, Jennifer Connelly didn't seem like very developed to me. She doesn't really have much of a personality of
Mm-hmm.
of much sort. Like, there's nothing like substantive that's like explained there really. In the book, she's just like, if I remember properly, she's just like this a really good artist who's like really successful, and we don't really see much of that.
Yeah, we get like
Like,
a kind of passing mention to it. Like, your drawings are
mm-hmm,
so good, we can get out of here
mm-hmm,
one day. And it's, it's the kind of focus on those big sweeping, ideas and gestures that I think comes at the expense of the depth and complexity,
mm-hmm.
really. And I think you could say the same thing that you're saying about Marion's character, about Tyrone, and even about Harry, honestly, that all of the stuff with them, again, without focusing just on the stylistic part of it, is such a straight ahead, looking for the big score and the bad times come and everything. And the way that everything kind of happens simultaneously, where, any one of these individual stories could seem authentic, but maybe just the fact that these are all happening at the same time, like to this guy and his mom and his girlfriend and his best friend, and they all kind of end up in the same place simultaneously at the end,
Yes.
that which makes it all seem just kind of preordained, in which is what kind of, I think, dampens the impact of that final act, which is just this symphony of despair and body horror and sexual degradation and
Yeah.
brutal prison guards and, losing a limb and everything.
It
Where
almost feels
And
like borders on
you
like an
know
old-fashioned exploitation movie at that point, like a scared straight movie from the '70s, where it would just be like
mm,
there's so many of those sort of hippie movies from that time that are all about
yeah,
like
it's like,
they
yeah,
start out like they're having a great time in the summer of love, and then it all goes to hell because they, there's now they're selling their bodies on the street, and there's drugs, and it's horrible, and they're having a horrible time, and their lives are destroyed, and like that's sort of like the point of the movie, for like, because it is just to get a reaction out of the audience, which that is sort of what's going on. It's like the most beautiful looking exploitation movie, like.
and it's like, why is Sarah Goldfarb getting electroshock therapy just for
In
like
like the new
just for
millennium.
yeah, like I didn't really. I mean, I feel like that's just there just to like get, like you said, like a reaction from the audience. Um,
yeah, they
it,
really pile it on there because, they dwell on her squirming and shrieking while they're putting a tube up her nose. And of course the orderlies are just talking about their weekend while they're all doing it. It's not clear like how much time has passed, because it seems like she's there like one or two nights and they're saying, well, we've tried every medication and you're not responding to anything. Apparently we haven't gotten
Mhm.
a hold of anyone who even knows you. And now we're going to move on to ECT, which I have read that that is something that they sometimes still use today for people with super severe depression, that they have gotten good results with when, they're really desperate to find anything that works. So, yeah, I don't know how likely it is that they would be using that in whenever this movie takes place for someone who's just out of her mind on pills. I don't
Well, I'm
know.
glad you brought that up. That scene is also, yeah, it feels like it's shot like he's almost like a mad scientist during that montage or something. Like she's in like Frankenstein's lab or something. And that is intercut with Hubert Selby Jr., the author, who's like sort of meant to be a little funny, also thrown in there in the midst of all the horrible stuff. And there's like almost like a gleefulness to the montage at the end, like the horrible montage. There's like I almost wonder if there is some sort of like knowing, like he knows how far he's going, how absurd like the heights are getting. It's obviously not trying to get laughs, but it's a weird sort of crisscross of feelings for me.
Yeah, and I think with all that said, then if there is a saving grace, it is most of the stuff that we get with Ellen Burstyn's mom's character. And because I was pretty critical about, the other characters having these pretty thin arcs and kind of more being types than really authentic seeming people. Or if they're authentic, it's in a glancing kind of way that's not very specific. But I think that Ellen Burstyn comes closest just with her performance being so just heartbreaking and vulnerable and anguished that she almost overcomes that the way that her arc has that same foregone conclusionness to it and the kind of
Mm-hmm.
lack of depth that she at least comes closest to doing that. And because her story
Yeah,
is a
she
little
almost
less typical, you
escapes
know.
this like
Mhm.
exploitive storm that is the ending, kind of.
Yeah, and she was nominated for Best Actress at the Oscars for this, so she got some recognition for it, and I'm sure it was not fun to do because she spends a lot of it in a fat suit since she's supposed to be losing weight, and it really is upsetting seeing her at the end when she looks like a corpse walking around. Like, however they did that with the makeup and her performance is just not a fun time to
She just like
look
broke
at
my
with
heart
her.
like the entire the entire movie. Just everything that just the loneliness that she exudes is like so relatable for like a lot of people to like a lot of people just have people in their lives who are like that who just don't who just watch TV all the time and they don't really have anyone. Uh,
Yeah, and she has that specificity the other characters don't have. Her whole crew of old ladies that hang out in front of the apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And she's not just dealing with a drug addiction. Before that, she's dealing with like food addiction, basically, and trying to go on a diet. And some of that stuff is a little funny, like the way she, sets out her grapefruit and everything, and it just kind of disappears before she could even seem to touch it. And the egg cracks and disappears, and that's that stuff adds shades to it. And then when she is losing her mind, I think that those are some of the most effective scenes because I think that my take on Aronofsky is that he's like a really great horror director who sometimes gets wrapped up in this pretension with a lot of his projects. But when you let him loose on like a scene where her refrigerator becomes like a man-eating, like literally opens up its like jaws and is coming out after her to get her, and she's like losing her mind. Uh, that's where I'm like, yeah, more of this. And
yeah,
spoiler alert for the next movie we're going to discuss for him. I think that's where he really can put that skill
You
to
get a
use. But
lot more of that, and then some. Yeah.
mm-hmm,
yeah. And even Jared Leto's arm wound, which gets to be just revolting looking, from
Smells worse
shooting
than
up
him.
so much. And that close up of, he's showing his arm and it's just all purple and overgrown and disgusting. And he still shoots right into it with a needle. Like, ugh. That's body
Yeah.
horror
Why
right
don't
there.
you use the other arm?
Yeah.
That one.
Maybe I don't know how that kind of stuff works, but it
I don't
Yeah,
seems like
know.
the
can't you do
wrong
that?
decision.
Can't you shoot that pretty much anywhere? Like you could do it in like your eyeballs and your toes and shit.
Train
Why
spotting
is?
taught us this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would once my arm looked like that. So,
Well,
yeah.
that's the thing.
Meanwhile,
I
oh,
yeah. Well,
Go
that's
ahead,
the
Seth.
thing I wonder about with this movie is the like. I don't know. I don't have a history with hard drugs or anything like it, and I don't like to get into that sort of idea that like a filmmaker has to have had like experience with like whatever the subject matter is. It is like kind of it is kind of intense and weird like to think about like an NYU film student like who seems very safe in their life contemplating these things of like someone's life being destroyed by heroin addiction. I have to assume there was a lot of research that went into this as well. Of course, he's using Hubert Selby Jr.'s book, which is he was also, if I'm not mistaken, a drug addict at some point. which I
Well,
suppose, yeah.
uh, speaking of research, should we talk for a minute about Jared Leto's like kind of pseudo method approach to this? Did anybody read about this in their
Not in regards to
in their
this movie,
studies?
but please tell me that you saw his
I
own
heard
arm off.
Tony. I heard Tony read about it.
He actually had sex with Jennifer Connelly and
A
had a
lot,
great
yeah,
time
yeah.
What a
Uh,
to
poor
get into
guy.
character.
And I don't know, like I couldn't. I did some digging to try to find real like hardcore specifics on this because I wanted to know like what does this mean? Like, is this a turn of phrase? But he apparently spent some time living on the streets of New York in the lead up to this, and like befriended a bunch of people who were homeless or addicted themselves. And he obviously did do the kind of the classic
Whoa.
method acting rapid weight loss thing by starving himself. But I couldn't really find anything that said like, oh yeah, Jared Leto was sleeping in a tarp on like like in Washington Heights or something. Like I could not find anything like that. So I don't know that he was literally living on the streets, but he at least spent a lot of time hanging out like with people who were you know who were clearly like actively deeply struggling spiraling drug addicts.
I'm sure whatever he did, he annoyed the shit out of them. Those poor people.
Right.
It was anything like his Joker thing, like sending them weird gifts and dead fish and walking around.
Boy.
And then I'm sure he got up whenever he got tired of it and went over to Penn Station and got a sub or something. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's also a scene like the scene where they're in the grocery store and there are a bunch of like druggy like looking people hanging around. Those were all just people they brought in off the street who were addicts hanging around. So this is another just like in Kids where Larry Clark just was like, "Oh, we need some extras. Let's just get these suffering people who are ill and in and desperate. Let's just get all them in here for the day." And they did the same kind of thing in this.
I hate to compare anything to Kids, but I think the spirit of it is kind of the same
Yeah, there
here.
is that scared straight
Yeah.
quality to it, and also the use of what Tony's talking about. That's even in like My Own Private Idaho. Like a lot of those kids are like real street kids from like Olympia and stuff like that. Which is this sort of weird, like I don't know, like I feel like if I was actually researching that hard and getting that like in depth with like getting to know these people, I don't know if I would want to make like a huge horrible montage about their lives being destroyed. But I don't know. I feel like I would abandon this project at a certain point. But
Yeah, and as far as like the scared straight aspect goes, I'll say I've always had a really good time doing drugs, and the people in these movies we talk about on this podcast for whatever reason just do not. So don't let this podcast turn you off on the idea of doing drugs. Maybe just let this podcast turn you off on the idea of being a main character in a Darren Aronofsky film.
yeah, I mean, I just watched the first part of this movie and the first part of Train Spotting, so I don't think there's anything wrong. I think it sounds pretty fun.
Yeah, man, I think she looks great in her red dress. I hope she does good on TV. I'm sure she'll win lots of nice prizes.
Yeah, I think those
Well, you
Skag
got a
boys are going to
winner.
be just having fun. Yeah, no problem. We got a winner. We got a winner. Shoot him, Gavin.
Well, before we get into any like final thoughts, I do want to make sure I at least mention the sound design because I think that's as big as the visual stuff that's all going on here. And
Yeah.
I mean that goes beyond the hip hop montages to all kinds of different sounds and atmospheric overlays, audio from other scenes. I feel like a ton of attention was put into that aspect of this movie. And the score I feel like is so well known now, the actual music score in this, which I mean, how many movies these days, just original regular movies, have a theme or a score in them that gets stuck in your head, or that you would leave with afterwards?
Yeah, this
So
is the
kudos to
Kronos
that.
Quartet. It's just like used in everything. I feel like I've heard it like during the Olympics and in like video game trailers and just trailers for random stuff that has nothing to do with this movie. Like
Yeah, I saw it in an NFL commercial and it was like,
Kronos
are they
Quartet is all
playing?
about that Monet. They're all about that Monet.
Yeah. It's like, are they playing
There's
Requiem
like
for a
this.
Dream during the Super Bowl? Look, nope. It's just the score.
There. What was I gonna say? The sweeping strings throughout the movie sometimes come at like the most like unexpected times. Like when there's like one scene in particular where Harry and Marion are having a huge fight, and then it's like the music's going one way, and then it gets like these really dramatic like uh, it's just like a turn of strings when she's like, I don't know what I'm gonna have to do to get the drugs or something, and then like the music is like completely just like it's like so extra at that point, where it had been like so tame, and then he's like so clearly trying to guide you in a certain emotional direction with this change of fast music and these and what Clint Mansell and Kronos Quartet did with the
Zero
dramatic
ambiguity.
strings.
Yeah, that reminds me of when Keith David shows up near the end of this movie as this guy who just
Oh
trades
yeah.
sex for drugs, and that's where Marion ends up going to. And there's a moment where he basically is like unbuckling his pants to get
Mhm.
oral sex from her, and flat out like psycho strings start.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like
Again, like reaching this silly, absurd level, like that I don't know necessarily what to do with, but quite often is a little bit of a signature of an unwatchable movie. It seems that absurd horror seems to come up a lot on this podcast,
Yeah, and that, I mean, we
even for
didn't really
something
talk
like
about
that.
that. The ass to ass scene was what got this in NC-17, and that ended up being released unrated. But I guess that was, important enough to him to, to put two different versions of the movie out there. And
Yes,
it is awful, but I guess everything is awful in this. So
yes,
at the end, it's literally them just all going into the fetal position in completely different locations. And so we have Marlon Wayans just in jail being yelled at by an old novelist for the rest of his life, I guess. And, Harry loses his arm, and, Jennifer Connelly, I guess, has lost her soul. And then, of course, there's Sarah Goldfarb, who's, I guess, just out of her out of her mind too. And yeah, they really hit home with that. And then the movie just ends.
and Wayne's does he get a fetal position shot? I forget,
Not only does he
but
get
I
a
think
fetal
so.
position
Yeah.
shot, it's overlaid with like an image of him as a little boy being cradled by his mother, just in case you
Oh
weren't
yeah.
feeling sad enough.
I will say one of my favorite shots Darren Aronofsky ever did is that swirly shot where he's fucking his girlfriend or whatever, and like the camera like goes up above them while they're having sex. I just think that's
Mm,
such an awesome, beautiful shot.
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um,
I
Were you
just
gonna
need
say
to do a
something?
but
final. Yeah, I need to do a final piece of trivia roundup. The only thing I had on my list that didn't get talked about, which is that Dave Chappelle was briefly considered for the part of Tyrone.
wow,
Well, that would have been interesting. I don't feel like he would have looked as good naked as Marlon Wayans does
no,
in his sex scenes.
I should clarify. I said briefly considered. He was offered the part and he turned it down. So there it was very close to being in this movie.
whoa, I'm
Wow,
okay with that given recent
that's
news.
wild. Well,
Well,
any final thoughts about Requiem for a Dream? Um, and we do want to cover the question is of if you could unwatch this, if you would. So I don't know, James, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. I, I I would not unwatch it. I think there's a lot of. It's just. It's a very visceral movie, but I think there's a lot of good moments in all of the darkness that happens to all the characters in terms of, yeah, it's just so many cool things are happening on screen all the time. Like it's like I would not want to not see this. And the music's so cool, and Ellen Burstyn's character is so heartbreaking. Um, yeah, I still like the movie, um, and I think it's a watchable.
It's a watcher.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would watch it again. Yeah, while it's exploitive at certain points and kind of like debatably naive, it does just have like a exciting quality, that momentum that you can get caught up in. I do like that it is shedding light on these, again, very everyday tragedies, which are, I don't know, uh, not always given this much attention and not given this much uh, I don't know, for ferocity with film convention and aesthetics and music and stuff like that, and presented like they are like a blockbuster movie or something. I kind of appreciate it for that.
Yeah, I think we're all pretty much on the same page about that. The its heart's in the right spot, and it's really more of a naivete or a narrow-mindedness than it is anything that is particularly scaremongering or anything like Kids is. And I do agree that this goes down a lot easier because there is a certain level that you can appreciate it on just as a visual experience. So I do like it, slightly more than a lot of other movies that we've talked about on this podcast, even if ultimately I definitely don't love it as much as I did back when I was way too young to be watching it. And it kind of falls into that category of all the movies I shouldn't have been watching, like this and Kids and A Clockwork Orange, that have not necessarily stood the test of time. Although I think this has an edge over those two other movies as far as in my personal canon, because I was a little swept up in the style and everything still, and Ellen Burstyn, all that stuff that you guys brought up. So I'm certainly not going to start and watching things with this one.
Oh, now we got a whopper. Oh my god.
But again, this
He
was just
made.
his second movie, and now things get interesting. But yeah, before we get to Mother, I do want to real quick just skim over his very interesting career in between these two movies, because he followed it up with The Fountain, so we have this big science fiction, esoteric statement, then followed up by this low-key drama character study, The Wrestler, and then veers off again into this lurid psychodrama, like Repulsion style freak out with Black Swan. And it just,
Mhm.
when you think you know where he's going to go next, is when he goes to his biblical epic Noah. And
I
at
love
this point,
Noah.
I just
I
thought
can't
maybe I,
help
yeah,
it.
had lost the thread. Um, so very interesting going through those. But Black Swan was a big revelation to me at the time because I very much liked that movie. And that was kind of the moment where I was thinking, wow, this is the Aronofsky that it's all been building to. Like, finally, he's getting to really flex his horror muscle and his psychological tension in ways that are kind of silly and over the top, but that are just a
Hmm.
blast for me.
I think
And
it just keeps getting nuttier and
you know,
nuttier. Like even Noah, like even though it's less like art house, it's just like crazy that any of that movie exists. You just can't believe like what is happening on screen, and I kind of love that. And that gets taken again like to the next level with Mother, which is just like, wow, there's no predicting what the hell is happening on this thing.
Yeah, and I remember thinking that Noah seems like his most compromised movie, where there were clearly things in it that were supposed to be like a big blockbuster. I remember there being some really silly rock monsters that have some sort
I
of role
love those.
in the plot.
See,
And
the meddling makes it even more interesting to me. I feel like
I thought the fight sequences were the trade off for me, just like the
yeah,
action sequences where
it's like Lord of the
like
Rings all of a sudden.
yeah.
Sure. But then it does have this kind of cool creation sequence that's really the main thing I
Yeah.
remember about the movie, where I was thinking, all right, this is the part where this snaps together, or there maybe here's a glimpse of what he found interesting in this material.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mother comes along and I think snaps it back into could not be less compromised. That this
Yeah,
is like 100% he got some of his friends together in a house and locked him in there for the weekend and shot something.
yeah.
And I really, so we're talking about 2017 now, which is, quite a distance from Requiem for a Dream. But I remember when this movie came out, it was marketed as a horror film. It starred Jennifer Lawrence, who was one of the biggest stars in the world at that time, and has other familiar faces like Javier Bardem and Michelle Pfeiffer and Ed Harris. And people went out to see it and they hated it. There's this thing called Cinemascore, which is basically a poll that they take of general audiences when they're leaving a movie, like right as they walk out of the theater on opening weekend. And Mother was one of only 22 films in the history of Cinemascore to get a flat F.
Which is so
I witnessed someone. I saw it on opening night in 2017 in Columbus, Ohio, and the person that was sitting like 2 seats away from me had like this notebook, and then when the movie ended, he slammed the notebook shut and then like threw it down onto his knee. And
that was probably him.
amazing.
That was probably Johnny Cinemascore.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tony and I saw this probably opening weekend in 2017, and I'll never forget our theatrical experience because it was great. It was loaded with normal people, but a lot of like teenage girls. And as it went on, you could see them moving like into confusion, into being completely confounded, then to being angry
I
at
can't believe this
at the
movie
movie.
happened.
And
I can't believe it.
yeah, that's my favorite thing about it. I also
Yes.
can't believe that it happened.
And I was really
It's
psyched.
almost like the Passion of the Christ or something.
I'll never forget that movie theater experience, and it just was such a like a just a luck of just the circumstances and the timing of all of this that like Jennifer Lawrence just happened to be really like blowing up around this time, and like was exactly the type of actress who could for this narrow window at least like draw all these people out to see a movie like knowing nothing else about it. And so it ends up being like the perfect, like on top of it already being such like a confrontational like experience for audiences, it just has this like this hook that just gets so many people out that I imagine pretty much everybody that saw this like in its first couple of weeks had some similar experience of people just absolutely losing it in the audience.
See, I totally missed it. I didn't know there was so much hate for this movie. And because I was kind of out of the Aronofsky game for a little bit. Because I feel like I said earlier in the Requiem part of this, that I think I was still in that phase where when this movie came out, where I was just kind of cross-armed about, I didn't know what to think of Aronofsky anymore. Like, because he is this sort of, is he just being pretentious? Is he just like you hear too many like film school bros talk about him or something, and then you get all like, again, I get a little cross-armed. But this movie put me back. I am in love with this movie. I think I just watched it today, and what the fuck, man? I did not know this was the deal. And I love looking at all the negative reviews. The negative reviews are hilarious. They're like the there was one review by The Guardian that made me feel stupid because I never realized that it's gobsmacked, G-O-B. It says no leaves no gob unsmacked, and I always thought that it was just Godsmacked, like the band, until this point because I never saw it in writing, but it's G-O-B smacked. I didn't know there was such thing as a gob, which is apparently part of your mouth. Gob, I think. It's smacking my gob. And this movie did that to people, and it smacked my gob. I was gobsmacked.
Mother
I could tell your
smacked
gob
all
was
of our
looking a
gobs.
little sore. Yeah.
Mommy was mad. So who we should spin the bottle and see who has to like do the plot synopsis of this thing. Because I don't know if I'm ready.
Well, I can have a go at it unless anybody else wants to.
have your fun. I'll try it. We can chime in. And
all three of us
yeah,
will.
please.
Well, all three of us will not listen in and give our own interpretations of the plot that happens.
Yeah, we'll just
Yeah,
go
we
around.
can play like
I think it would
telephone
be-
with what the hell this
Yeah.
movie is.
Yeah.
I mean, at least stylistically, this. Well, I'll ask this question later, but I am interested to see if you didn't know, if you had just seen his first few movies, if you would even know this was Aronofsky, because most of all that stuff with Requiem for a Dream we were talking about is gone, and this is mainly grainy, handheld, like claustrophobic, single setting chamber drama is kind of how it starts out, at least, and it really does bring to mind something like Rosemary's Baby or Repulsion. I guess Roman Polanski is in the air, where there's something very soaked in dread and uneasy going on, and it is not clear exactly what it is for an extremely long time.
Yeah, I thought it would stay there, which it does not. It is very far. By the end, you are so far from being Rosemary's Baby, you don't know where you are. Yeah.
Sure. But when it starts, everyone in the theater is still kind of like, all right, cool, let's see what the spooky shit is going on. We've got this married couple, Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem, living together in this big house secluded in the countryside that's way too big for the two of them. And he is a famous writer, kind of struggling with writer's block, it's suggested. And she is basically a homemaker who's completely in service of supporting him, and there's talk
She's
about
literally
how
a homemaker.
she wants a child. Oh yeah, good one. We should say that the first thing you see in this movie is this fiery tableau, and this house kind of that's been burnt down is regenerating, and you're not really
Amazing
sure what
time
to think.
lapse.
Yeah,
for sure.
Time lapse.
Backward time lapse. They burned Jennifer Lawrence to ash and then played it backwards. But at this point, you're not really sure what's going on. If that's a dream or if it's symbolic or what's going on. But yeah, they're just living together, and another couple. First Ed Harris kind of wanders into their house, this total stranger, and you can tell that the husband, which, by the way, these are another one of those movies where they're just named he and she, going back to Antichrist territory. So he is very eager to take him, Ed Harris.
Well, this is bringing me back to when I thought
wife.
this movie was a normal movie. This is bringing me back to my naive days, like 3 hours ago, when I thought this movie was a normal movie, and I was just so wrong.
Yeah, this is
so young back then.
Nostalgia-tinted glasses. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, this mysterious stranger walks in. I know what's going to happen.
Yep, and the main thing is that it's very clear Jennifer Lawrence is very uncomfortable with these people coming in, and her husband is very eager to bring them in and violate her privacy and the sanctity of her home, and she can never have him to herself. And it gets worse and worse when Ed Harris's wife, Michelle Pfeiffer, who is fucking brilliant in this movie, arrives at the house as well. And, from there on, it's like, well, a bunch of shit starts to happen, and it's never exactly what you're going to expect. And once they seem like they're just about rid of this obnoxious couple, their two sons show up and one kills the other. And
Oh man.
I could
And
just describe a whole bunch of incident, but let's just take it one step at a time here.
what's important to like say about it is that what as you describe the plot, it probably sounds like, oh, this must be taking place over the course of many days. Like, oh, the sons show up like 3 days later or something, but it's not the case. Like, that's the thing. The movie, by the end of it, crazy stuff happens. So much happens, but it feels the way the speed of it works and the way that we are in the mother's perspective feels like it's just happened in the course of like 90 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it is. Like just all this stuff is happening like minute to minute to minute, which I think is the like really intense part about this movie is that things escalate so fast. Like truly like a dream, which is something that gets thrown around a lot when it comes to like surreal movies. But this really, really struck me like a dream, just in that these sort of mundane yet frightening things that are going on, and they feel so out of. I her the way she reacts to this the strange things like people just coming into her house all of a sudden and just like everybody else having like some idea that she is not privy to about what's going on is just very dreamlike to me. That like so often like the worst nightmares are just like that, where it's just like I just couldn't figure out what was happening, and like I can't explain why it was scary, but it was just like I was out of control, without control, and that's how she feels like throughout the whole movie.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that Jennifer Lawrence is so good in this because her whole performance is so reactive to everything that's happening around her. And there's all of these just little slights and microaggressions from her husband, from these two new guests, and then eventually more and more strangers start showing up to the house, and she just reacts to everything like it's like she's so wounded with every time that someone shuts her down or gaslights her, or has no regard for her own feelings and privacy. That it really, I want to give her a lot of credit for filtering all of that to make it seem so uncomfortable and to really tap into stuff that would make me incredibly uncomfortable. And I can't think of any other movie that taps into those very specific feelings of being violated and ignored and just no one listening to you and everyone making insinuations. And why won't you guys get off the goddamn sink? It's not braced to the wall. Stay off the sink. And they
That
won't
happens
stay
so
off
many
the sink.
times. Everybody's sitting
And that's
on
my
the
favorite
sink.
running joke in this movie.
It's so
is
good.
the goddamn sink.
And
And so,
also
yeah, does this
we
play
don't
like
want
a...
to.
No, go ahead.
And that's
Well,
yeah.
there's only one little plot thing that I don't want to forget that I still
Sure.
we need to discuss at some point is the crystal. There's just like this little crystal that Javier Bardem's character keeps in his study that the brothers break. The brothers of Ed Harris who come in at some point and they
Actually, I
break the
think that his
crystal.
wife...
It's their parents.
I think
Yeah,
that
it's
the
Parents.
wife or both of them break it because it's right before
Well-
the brothers show up.
correct.
Which is just another
Oh, yeah.
thing where you're just like, okay, there's a crystal. All right, he's got a, and they broke it. Shit. Oh, and he's really mad about it. Oh, okay. That'll make sense eventually for me,
Just
right?
crushes it in his hand until it bleeds.
Yeah. She's also getting all these, even at this early point in the movie.
I love how
she's
the
Oh no, go ahead.
No, go for it.
Well, yeah, even at this early point in the movie, she's already like seeing like weird fleshy, bloody things in the house. Looks like making the house look like it's has weird body parts and stuff. Which I'm like, that'll make sense eventually, right?
Yeah, just listening to the walls and hearing it do what walls do, and that's breathe and have a heartbeat. But what I was what I was going to say earlier is that it failed to mention that the reason that that first party is happening is just because this funeral from the brother's death turned into this giant rager that it's like so amazing with the public speaking fear, and then just the fact that all these people keep coming and they just want to have a celebration of life that just turns into chaos. And the great flood, the great biblical flood with the unbraced sink ends the party.
There you go.
Yeah, that's we really should try to get across like what a slow boil this movie is, and then at certain points it just totally goes over the side of the pot. So we have this simmer for a long time that's just about these two intruders, and even with them there's all these great little moments where, you know, both of them are just way too forward and imposing and rude in ways that's even more infuriating because it does not bother the husband, and even though it so clearly is unnerving the wife. And you know, this couple, they have these inappropriate displays of affection for each other, and Michelle Pfeiffer, who is so wonderful in this, just little things like when she goes to do laundry and there's some already in the washer and she just splats them on the floor, and Jennifer Lawrence is like, what are you doing? And makes a big mess in the kitchen. But then after their sons show up and one kills the other, they show up again later and suddenly they're having this like wake of a kind at the house, and all these strangers start showing up. And I think that's when the movie really starts to tip over into, oh wait, this is going like way further over the top than I was prepared for, in like a reality bending way. And you're so right, James, that the way that these people start showing up and they won't get off of the sink, and I laugh so hard every time when she walks downstairs and there's a guy with a fucking roller painting her like ceiling and walls, and she's just, why are you painting my house? And it's
so
like
amazing.
A horror movie, but it's so absurd.
It hits differently. We bought a house recently, and then watching this movie, it was just like a nightmare for like someone who now has like a house, and it's like, oh my god, like if any of this stuff happened, like, God.
Yeah, I hope none of this stuff happens to
Kill
you in your
people.
new house.
Yeah.
And then in the lead up to all this stuff is, you know, what you guys were talking about, where there's all this mysterious stuff happening and you're waiting for the horror movie payoff because, like you said, she's painting this room and we get kind of a vision of kind of a fetus or a heartbeat kind of forming behind the wall. And Jennifer Lawrence she has these little spells where she needs to take out this little yellow powder and mix it with water and drink it so she can kind of regain herself. And she starts, there's something weird going on with the furnace in the basement, and she sees a heart in the toilet.
There's a weird photo that's ripped up, and I can't figure out what it is.
Yes.
And all these like little tiny items.
And Seth, you mentioned the diamond.
Yeah.
This diamond, which is like his prized possession, that was the only thing that survived a fire that destroyed everything he owned years ago. And so we have all of this stuff going on, and I think that's kind of one of the things you have to accept about this movie is that it's constantly introducing these ambiguous things that you can read 100 different things into. I feel like this is the movie of 1,000 different metaphors and symbols that you can apply to it, and all these different interpretations.
I'm trying to remember the line because, like, I made the joke
about the diamond.
Like, no, that she's a homemaker, but there is like a line that he says very early on that like the house burnt down and she made the house herself or something. She like remade the house for him.
Yeah, she does say like I built this house.
Which is just like, yeah, so it burnt down and she built the house again, it's implied.
And then she says something like I'm doing a lot of work, and then Javier Bardem is just like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he's
Like right at the beginning.
constantly having
Yeah.
these little asides that just wound her to the core.
Mm.
Uh, yeah, he's this is the worst husband. Honestly, I would rather be married to him than like his No Country for Old Men character. Or no, I would rather be married to that character than this one. Because at least
I
you like
will
know where he
say,
stands.
oh my god, I will. Yeah, I don't want to marry God necessarily, but I don't want to marry him as Satan either in No Country for Old Men.
It's a
But
toss
there
up.
is an interesting through line with the couple and like Requiem, and I could see like throughout his whole filmography that he at least addresses what I think is probably a common conceit of his work, that it is just about the bombast and the style and the maximalism, um, which I think he actually confronts really well in Noah and in this movie, and at the better points in Requiem, which are, even though there's like this is an exercise in chaos, like he is like Darren is clearly using this movie like as like what could I do with like an army of intruders in a house and like what chaos could I create? It still very much like brings you back to these two characters, which like both exploring the maximalist drama of the whole thing, but also just like can I just shoot a scene with these two characters and make you care about them and make you like even though you're confused by their like dynamic, like you are entranced by it. I think he does do a good job with that, and it's to his credit that he's not sort of just like one or the other.
Yeah, and there's so many different things that you can read into this. I feel like almost every line somebody says is so loaded with symbolic and metaphorical potential, and that it's
Mm-hmm.
easy to get lost at all these different things. And I do have kind of specific thoughts about that, but is something I want to get everybody's opinion on, because I think there's some things that are kind of obvious. There's definitely something going on here about Javier Bardem being this artist who is using his wife as a muse and for inspiration and support and love at home, but he's not willing to just share that with her, that he's using her up, and he is going through this creative process that involves constantly giving her up for other people. But that's just one way to look at it, because there are a ton of biblical allusions in this. Seth, you just called Javier Bardem God, and I think there is a level where he's supposed to be looked at like that, and that goes
Yes.
from the two brothers showing up, one killing the other, is like a really clear Cain and Abel reference.
Mm-hmm.
And she talks about this being their paradise together, and then the thing that happens at the end, which I'm going to try to structure this so we can tackle that on its own and not get too far ahead of ourselves, but there is a sacrificial type thing that happens that
Yeah.
is definitely brings all that stuff up. But I think it all fits, and there's not one thing necessarily that holds it 100% together. And that's what I like, that it leaves enough room for ambiguity and different things you can bring to it. And again, all that stuff wouldn't matter if I didn't find this movie so like insanely, deliriously like entertaining and hilarious and terrifying. But I'm willing to indulge all of that stuff because, like you guys, I love this movie. Definitely my favorite Aronofsky film, but it was also my favorite movie the year that it came out. And now on my like fourth watch, I was just as blown away by it and couldn't believe what I was watching. So
I was surprised at how surprised I still was like watching it. Like I like I was just like I had forgotten like that, like the sequence of things that happened, and how there's like that one party that happens, the chaos, everything that happens toward the point, then it settles down, and then it just goes back into right. It's basically a movie of two parties that are just horrible house parties.
worst
That's
parties
a good
ever.
point.
Yeah,
Which
it's just like it's
yeah, the middle point is what kicks off the second party, the second and final party. Which is, yeah, I never thought about it separated like that, which is, I guess, initiated by this middle point where it seems like everybody left. Am I right? It seems like everybody left for a
everyone
second.
left. Everyone left. She
So
got pregnant.
Like right
Yes,
away.
because
Like you said, the
yeah, right
timeline
away.
speeds up in this.
yeah, she
That it
wakes up
seems
and
like
she's
over the
already
course of a
like
day.
months pregnant.
Yeah, yeah.
And
At the end of the first, yeah,
hmm
at the end of the first party, he basically like assaults her, uh, and then next morning they wake up and she's like, "I'm pregnant," and he's like, "I'm gonna," and he sprints over to his notepad and writes writes this thing that, I mean, as a poet myself, I also understand that when I write a poem and then there will be like thousands of people who flock to my door in immediately
Oh
as soon
yeah.
as
I
it's
know I had
finished.
to give up poetry. I couldn't handle it anymore.
It's too hard.
People
Yeah.
just kept showing up,
Yeah, this
loving
is
it.
actually how James and I met. Is as part of a pilgrimage I took to his home upon the release of his latest work, and yeah, he's like stole a bunch of stuff from his house and demolished his sink, and now
Yeah,
here he is
yeah.
on the podcast.
He
Oh
stole me
You were
like
the one who
200
ate
bucks for that.
James's baby, right?
Oh,
Oh,
Sorry,
spoiler!
spoiler.
Spoiler!
Sorry. Anyways, going back.
Yeah.
But
So
no, yeah,
yeah,
we get this
he
brief little respite. You're right, Seth, that everyone leaves and she gets pregnant, and that seems to coincide with his writer's block going away, and
but she
he
gets one
composes his
page.
masterpiece.
All it takes is one page for him to form a cult. Basically, immediately, people start showing up again because they love his poem so much.
Yeah, or whatever it is he wrote. I'm not even sure it's ever clear if it's a
Yeah, we don't
book
even know
or
if
a
it's a
collection of
poem.
poems or a novel.
And
But yeah,
someone
we get this.
offhandedly says, it's like I wrote it, like very early on. And it's just like something, oh, like, yeah, it's something that people say, it's like, it feels like I wrote it. But that becomes, as it goes along, the pandemonium over his poetry. Like, again, in the sequence of the movie, like 15 minutes later, reaches like a crazy fever pitch where there's like, oh, stream of believers and cultists and ravers that come to the house and are like, we wrote this, we are all one, we all write this, he is the one. There's like nothing that we're actually like privy to as to like how the like whatever this belief system is actually about. We don't know. We just get bits and pieces in like the huge second party that James mentioned. um
Yeah,
The Labor Party.
Yes, labor. That's good. That's really
and
good.
if you haven't seen this movie, this really unfolds just like a rapid fire nightmare where they're like about to sit down for dinner while she's 9 months pregnant and he's just finished his story or whatever it is. And seconds later, he's on the phone with his publisher talking about it. And then a minute later, fans are showing up outside. And it's like time has sped up and reality is completely disintegrating here. And like you said, now the house is filling and filling with people, and they're starting to steal stuff, like just grabbing things, tearing like doors and windows and shit off because they need something of the poets. And this was where the theater was really getting restless when I first saw this movie. I remember hearing some girl being like, "You didn't tell me this was a comedy." And they couldn't believe what they were seeing, because it gets even crazier from there. The cops show up and riots break out. Fire bombs are thrown. There's Kristen Wiig shows up as his publisher, and at some point there's people all lined up with their heads in sacks, and she's executing them.
Oh, I love her in this. I could not believe it's happening. She is like a good example of just that crisscross of the hilarity of the movie, and you're like, I'm kind of scared of her as she's
But then
executing these people.
right before Kristen Wiig tries to kill Jennifer Lawrence, then like a bomb like kills Kristen Wiig or something.
Yes. Yeah, all these
So
shrines are
ridiculous.
popping up where they're worshiping different artifacts, and we get a lot more of the, biblical kind of things that you could read into it.
Yeah, they refer to the mother as the inspiration. They keep on like every time she comes up, they all refer to her. Oh, you're the inspiration. Like she's like the Mother Mary.
And she doesn't want any of it. She's trying to get away, and they will not leave her alone.
I think each of the 10 plagues is in this.
Really?
Yeah. There's like
That's fucked
whole
up.
like death of the firstborn. Like there's like a fly on a windowsill at some point, and there's a frog jumping around in the basement.
I remember. You're right.
I don't remember the other plagues, but oh well, yeah, the great flood of the unbraced sink.
And the death of the firstborn.
Yeah, death of the firstborn. Immediately, thing was alive for like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Are we there yet? Are we going to talk about
Yeah.
that now?
Sure. Yeah, because it's as absurd as all this stuff is that we're saying, and it is like hilarious, but it Jennifer Lawrence is still taking it so seriously that I think she still draws us into the terror of it. And at one point, she does get away from them and gives birth alone in a room with Javier Bardem with the door bolted shut. And she's just trying to protect her baby. And there's another long, quiet sequence where she's holding the baby, and Javier wants to hold it, but she won't let him because he wants to share the baby with the crowd. And they have this standoff that is really haunting to me, where she's just trying to stay awake. And it looks like another day passes because the sun comes out and it goes away. And she just falls asleep enough for a second where the baby is gone. And he takes it out into the crowd of people. And again, if you haven't seen this movie, go ahead and watch it because it's crazy. But as soon as can you believe? I mean, could you believe how far it went with like
No.
they're taking the baby and you see it like piss into the air, and its neck gets like snapped just out of nowhere.
Yes.
And
'cause
we've
it's
spent
just
a
like
good
being tossed around
deal
in
of time with this
wave
little
of
newborn.
hands.
Yeah.
So scary.
Yeah, and when she gets to like the front of the room, which is an altar, and they're all feasting on the baby's remains. Everyone is, and she starts pulling the viscera like out of their hands, trying to take it back. And
They
I
beat
think
the
that
shit
that's
out
if
of
the
Stabbing
movie
them.
hadn't lost people by that point, that's the this is the unwatchable territory here, and it is
And then
horrifying.
when they start beating her, and like there's everyone around is just like calling her names and shit and beating her up,
Horrifying.
and it's so brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, this pulls no punches, and I think that people leaving the theater giving it an F, it's kind of the reaction that this movie's trying to elicit. This is a punk rock terrorist attack on the audience, which almost makes it more like Freddy Got Fingered than any other movie that we've talked about so far. That it's like what's going on between the people who agreed to sit down and watch this movie. And our contract has been broken. The world of the movie has gotten out of control, and we were not prepared for what's happening. And it's out to get you. And it got me.
It really is. I mean, but I think it's so easy to contest it, though, that it isn't. I think I would walk away feeling a lot more empty if it was just random shit, which I think that's the temptation to just say that this is all random shit. Or even just to like let it rest on that this is just like biblical symbolism being like thrown at the wall. I think even beyond that, what I arrived at like about the midpoint is like this is like just in the spirit of myth, like in fairy tale, like the in the way that like when you read like Greek myths or ancient Norse myths where like so and so came down from the heavens and touched someone's shoulder, so then they had to eat a bunch of yams for some reason. Like it's like that kind of logic where it's like it belongs to a logic, but it's like an ancient logic, or like we only are getting part of the logic because we
Or a
don't have
dream
enough
logic.
pages of the manuscript of the myth or whatever it is. Like that's what it struck me as that Aronofsky's playing at with this movie, rather than just being like, "Isn't it freaking crazy?" You know?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Do you, like James, do you have like a specific reading of this movie? How do you approach all of this stuff? Because I think that this invites you all throughout to project things onto it, um, very
Yeah, I mean,
obviously.
yeah, I feel like it could go like it could have like 1,000 different like readings, and they all could be correct in some way. But I always liked, as like a creative person myself, who hopefully isn't as vicious as Javier Bardem's character. I do like the idea of just like of this writer who, well, like this is just like a fictional world that just gets torn apart, and then you try again, and you try to like make it gets rebirth, and you try to make the whatever you're going for work. Hopefully not in as brutal of a way. I also like the fact that I also see it as like an environmental fable of some sort, where it's just like a bunch like humans trash like perfectly good like spaces. I know that like Darren's like a huge like environmentalist guy, so like that makes
Mm.
sense like in that reading, where it's like there's the movie never leaves like the planet of the home, and then every time several humans are introduced, like it all goes to shit until it like resets a little bit, and then more people come and just project their own destruction upon this really delicate um, home.
Oh,
But
I love that because the common thing with like environmental issues it is kind of this feeling that we only recently sort of like woke up to what's going on, and in some ways, sort of how the mother at the center of this movie feels is just constantly being like, wait, like 2 seconds ago we were here, and then now all of a sudden the world's ending like in 100 years. What the hell? Like what? How did we get here? We're like the like we
mhm.
lost a lot, like we lost the train of thought, we went too fast or
And it's
something.
like yeah, and it's like an assault on your senses, where it's it's like, oh shit. I mean, if it were to be read like as an environmental like cautionary tale, it's like this is happening extremely fast and in unpredictable ways, and then it'll eventually end in maybe not an explosion, but a similarly destructive act, um, over what seems to be happening faster than uh, than you'd hope. Climate change, at least. But I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, because it's a very another very visceral movie that has a lot of crazy shit happen over a short amount of time, like all of his other movies, basically.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's as a roller coaster ride basically that I appreciate this movie most. And it
Mhm.
would be so easy to find a lot of the symbolism and everything just insufferable if it wasn't working on this other level. Because I do think this
Mhm.
movie is technically pretentious as fuck. This is absolutely an art film, full of portent and meaning and interpretation and importance and everything. But it all works for me because he pushes it so far and it gets so silly, and it just as an insane horror movie, I think it's one of the wilder things I've ever seen. And it all that stuff aside, it taps into such these elemental things that would get to me personally, about people who like won't listen to you and won't go away, and everyone else seems in
Yes.
on something that you don't quite know what it is, and they all have this kind of condescending, insinuating thing every time they talk to you, and no one's taking you seriously, and you're just sitting there yelling your head off and no one can hear you. And that is unsettling to me.
I'm glad you brought that up. It almost reminded me of Funny Games that when I watched it, like times
Mhm.
10 or something, because it is this like very normal for a second. It's just back and forth with people, right? We're just talking, and then all of a sudden it escalates, and you don't know how you got there with this person and this altercation, which I think is the horror of funny games, of just suddenly like, oh, we were being normal people, like courteous people, and then all of a sudden you broke the rules, and like
Mm.
I'm no longer in control anymore. Which this is like a million more of those awful people breaking into your house, sort of.
Yeah, and I like how it leaves all of the readings open enough that you can just throw tons of shit in there or just ignore it all if you want to.
Yeah,
But
because I
I
think
do.
he avoids
Mhm.
being pretentious because his aim seems to be, at least in it feels like it was like a very raw intention of just being like, again, acting on the level of myth, and maybe even free association. It feels like stream of consciousness, a little bit. I think it's definitely like he fleshed it out with his own, like, obviously this is part of his own uh hang-ups and stuff, like those clearly pop up, like biblical whatnot is very important to him, and that those clearly pop up. But I think beyond that, there is something just sort of free about this movie that I think really works for it, rather than it being this sort of like, oh well, you better read the literature if you're going to be able to follow Mother, kind of thing.
Well,
Yeah, I think.
it's like
No, go, James. You're good.
it's like a lot of other like it's like other forms of literature where like things aren't so clear cut, but you can understand like what's going on. Um, so this movie felt very much like it's like sort of like you're not watching a movie; you're just seeing things presented to you, and then you're just free to just interpret what you will because nothing actually makes sense. Like,
It felt
and it's
more
also
like
like
poetry,
layered and
like
rich.
like John
Mm.
Ashbery or something. Like,
Yeah, I think that whole being dreamlike and surreal really works for it in this movie.
Yeah, and I've read a lot of things about this movie that I think overemphasize the biblical stuff because it's all absolutely there, like 100%. Um, but I do personally think that the through line holds together a lot better with this being about the creative process and an artist kind of, selfishly using his personal life and relationships in this, ever going circle not balancing that with how he has a relationship with his audience and his own self-importance about the whole thing. So a lot of the stuff he says I do find really funny, like when he's giving that eulogy at the funeral, which I wish I could remember what it was because it's really funny how fucking ridiculous
it's so
and
generic.
yeah, and generic and like smug that it is, and
Like
the
he's
way
not a
he
good
encourages
writer.
all his followers. Yeah, and if this was just about God, and I don't know, a lot of people seem to interpret Jennifer Lawrence as nature because you have to find some sort of metaphorical shoes to fill if he's going to be God. And I don't know,
Oh, right,
God
Mother
having
Earth. That's right.
writer's
Yeah,
block, like God having writer's block, and God and Mother Earth are arguing over him creating people, but he's exploiting Mother Earth to get people. Like I'm not sure all of that holds up if you're going to take that as your main thing for
right.
this.
Just like how, yeah, it doesn't stop at the biblical end. It's like just in the way
Yeah.
that, like, there's things in the Bible that you can tie to Norse mythology and you can tie to Greek mythology, and like all these. That's the thing about myth and all that. You can tie a lot of it together. Um, Archetypes.
In addition to all this stuff that clearly has all of this like biblical symbolism, there's also stuff in this that just like they never really like tell you what's happening, and it's not clear, like her constantly sneaking away to drink this like weird yellow powder. mixture
Yeah,
thing.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think had any clear, like, that didn't slide anything into the publical with any of the biblical stuff or the environmental stuff. And there's some kind of just traditional haunted house shit going on, like the blood stain on the floor, and
that's
there's
such a
all
good
kinds of
point.
like red herrings in this. So it's not like, I don't think, for as clear as the symbolism is, I think it's like self-aware, and it's not like, I don't think it's trying to beat you into submission with it.
Well, he is so good at building unease and dread and paranoia and little uncanny details. And so he just gets to run wild with that in this movie. Like early on, when Ed Harris is there, like spending the night, just the first night, Jennifer Lawrence comes in and finds him vomiting with Javier Bardem, like patting him on the back. And the next morning she asks about it, and they just act like they don't know what she's talking about. And you don't see any reason for them to be like hiding this or what's going on. It just makes you feel nervous.
Hmm.
And this movie is so great at doing that kind of stuff. And I think Black Swan has a lot of good moments like that too, actually.
Ed Harris just made me uncomfortable anytime he was in on the screen.
Who
Like,
you
even
go
from like
with?
he's just so weirdly presented. Like, from like the very first time he like walks in. I mean, he seems more comfortable as he goes on, but even like that first night, he's like, I heard you had like a bed and breakfast, and then he's like, no, I should be going. I should be going. No, I'll go. Like, he tries to leave like a couple times, and Javier Bardem is just like, no, you have to stay. But he's just so weird in this.
um, I guess on the thread of it being having like Christian ties and biblical ties to some of the subtext, at least. The I grew up going to church and stuff, so I can't help but like be hung up on some of that some of the time, which where this lands with a filmmaker at the center of it who is preoccupied by such things. And I don't necessarily know where he's at with his faith necessarily. I know it's a complicated relationship just from like what little I do know, but it is an interesting exercise in showing how he is like fascinated and wants to explore all these like how God relates to man and how Javier relates to his wife, and and like the horrible things he does, but are they things that are actually somehow secretly good for her? It like becomes this exercise, and like it feels like very rage filled at a certain point towards God. Like if Benicio is like in that, like at least on that level of interpretation, like some sort of God figure who is putting like either nature or mankind through this whole horrible endless cycle. It is very rage filled from what I can see, because it is this like, what the fuck? Why are you doing this to me? Like the mother is always asking Javier this, and he doesn't have a great answer. Like he only has like rather selfish answers. Like almost like God doesn't know. Like why is he fucking putting us through this? Like why does he put us through the plagues and all this stuff? Like
Or
it's
make us at
wild to
all.
witness.
Because if he's God, then he's only creating humanity so that they can worship him, which is another interesting angle,
Hmm.
But he seems so
implication to take away
humble
from
at
that.
every moment. It seems like he's still like smooth talking it, and he seems so humble throughout the whole thing. Like he still, even by the end, seems divorced somehow, if you don't think about it too much, from the crowd, even though he's clearly instigating it and gaslighting her. But yeah, it's like this
Gives
whole.
him the baby. Yeah.
Yep, it's true.
So, yeah, if we just run with him being God, that there are some pretty interesting directions that it takes that kind of question. And you could see anger there and too, like why make us just to put us through all this suffering and use us and uh, to adulate you. And
And he's like, just forgive
yeah,
them. Why don't you just? It's all like at the end, like she's supposed to. That's part of it, and she just won't do it. Like and then she gives her love. That's like that's the end, right? She's like burning the house down, burning herself. She's like a ashen corpse, and she just finally says like, "Take my love." And that's when he reaches inside her breast and pulls out her heart, which becomes the crystal that the Ed
Back to
Harris
the crystal.
and his wife broke at the beginning. And then everything sort of starts over, but with a different actress, right? Acting out the first scene. Is it a different actress?
Yeah,
It's a different
it
actress.
seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be suggesting that everything burned down, and then once he gets that diamond back out of her and uses her all up, that they're in this eternal recurrence of it springing back up. But now it's just a different woman,
It's slightly
and that's how the
different.
movie ends. So
And the first word of the movie is baby, and the last word of the movie is baby, which is just like a clever
Ooh,
clever
JJ.
thing.
oh, nice
Clever
catch.
thing he
James
throws
just
in.
cracked the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, it is called Mother,
Yeah.
so
And called baby.
that's a big concern here.
Yeah.
And I don't want to read too much into this like tabloid type stuff, but I mean, Darren Aronofsky has stated that this is a personal film of, about stuff that he was going through. And he was in a relationship with Jennifer Lawrence during this movie, during the filming of
Whoa.
this movie.
I didn't know that.
So
That's
if you look at that, where this is kind of explicitly talking about how this artist, this poet is using and abusing her, for his process. And you see what Jennifer Lawrence has to go through constantly in this movie, sobbing and going through all these horrible things. I mean, that's a whole other layer to throw on there.
Yes, I didn't know that.
And surprise, surprise, they are not together any longer. There's even the big age difference that they note, which was reflected in real life too.
Whoa, weird. He just kept inviting his stupid friends over.
Javier Bardem was Darren Aronofsky all along.
Yep.
Yeah. Jennifer Lawrence was just trying to hang out with Aronofsky, and she's like, "Why do you keep inviting Jared Leto over?"
Because I'm God. Because I'm God.
He's so weird. He's doing that movie in the wheelchair, and we had to put it in the ramp so he could visit us.
But where will he go?
A bummer. Yeah, but where will he go? They have nowhere else to go.
That always cracks me up every time I hear it. I'm just like, it's just, I don't know. It's such a weird assumption. It's like this, like what does he know that like we don't about these people? It's like there's
the
a lot,
way
a lot
Bardem
that he
delivers
knows.
those lines
Yeah.
leaves so much that you could read into it. He does a brilliant job too of selling this character and adding all these little grace notes that just make him creepier and more suspicious and not always
He's
totally
so
sure what's
seductive.
going on. Yeah. So I don't think anyone's going to want to unwatch this, right? I'm ready to put it on again right now.
Yeah, I'm in agreement that I think it's his best, like, strongest movie. Absolutely.
I will also not unwatch this. I will definitely watch it again in the future. There's just so much to unpack every time. I think I saw it in theaters like 2 or 3 times when it came out, and then I hadn't seen it since. And each time it's just been an experience where it's like shit's gonna hit the fan, and then you're there for the ride.
Yeah, there's nothing quite like the first time, but it holds up surprisingly well.
Mm-hmm.
Going back
Yeah, I'm
to
very
it,
curious.
even knowing where it's going.
Yeah.
All right, and I can't wait to see what Aronofsky does next, because he hasn't made a movie since, and he does have one that's in the works that's very
Brendan
strange
Fraser.
sounding. Yes,
Yeah.
Brendan
Ooh.
Fraser. I mean, sign me
I
up. I'll
can't
follow him anywhere now.
Yeah.
I hope it's a remake of Blast from the Past.
But
Yeah.
But he is also supposed to make a movie with Jared Leto in the next few years as well. Like
Oh,
a
God
haunted
help
ship
us.
film.
Maybe he can break his Letoverse streak.
Maybe he could play someone normal and have to cosplay as a normal person to get into character.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're just a guy. You got no limp. You got no weird accent. You got nothing.
Yeah.
He's just going to keep it in production for 10 years so that Jared has to stay that character. Just a
I
regular
just don't
dude.
get it. I just don't know how to do it. How do I be normal?
The Boyhood version of Jared Leto's career.
That's what he's been doing all along.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Oh boy. Well, James, thank you for joining us. This was a lot of fun. And I'm sure you have something out there that you would like to promote to our legions. Don't you have a book coming out?
Yeah, sure. I just came out with my third poetry chapbook about a week and a half ago. It's called Count Seeds with Me. And then I also came out with another chapbook like 6-7 months ago. It's also available, called Our Past Leaves. So,
James, where can people find you online or find your chapbook?
I have a website, jameskrolljackson.com. That's JamesCroal JackSon.com. And I'm also on Twitter at Jimjack, JimJakk, and Instagram,
MOUSC.
James Kroll Jackson.
Sorry.
I'm sure I probably shouldn't be giving this information because as a poet, I don't want people to come storming out my door and meet other Tonys who make pilgrimages.
I'm on my way. Hide your babies.
Yeah, I would definitely hide my baby.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.